no other questions, then we can go ahead with Josh Montgomery. I didn't see Daniel Williams in here. They're doing our superintendents responsible for lower student performance.
So can you see my screen? All right. So, hello everyone. It's always, I think, super exciting to have a chance to talk to folks from around the world. And so this is always a cool way to spend the first part of my day. I come to you from the boreal forests of northern Wisconsin. So I'm here on the shore of Lake Superior. I'm rolling in from this window right here. This is where I'm sitting. In terms of weather, there is snow in the forecast, if anybody's curious. So I'm representing work done collaboratively with two other folks, Dr. Dan Williams from Neosho Schools, myself here at Northland College, and then Anthony Burkhammer just got his doctorate at Arkansas State University. So, and our work is surrounding this idea about what role and what amount of responsibility superintendents take on for lowered student scores, test scores. So in terms of a big pick, so typically research acknowledges the importance of superintendents as instructional leaders. When district leadership falters, a gap persists in the existing literature that doesn't allow a complete picture of the causes of failed leadership. All too often, we simply blame teachers. We sought to better understand through our work how superintendents' implementation of policies without a communicated vision and teacher support negatively affected student performance as measured on state standardized assessments. When teachers do not see the value of district policies but are still forced to enact those policies, those teachers tend to lose both autonomy and agency. Consequently, student learning suffers. We found through the results of this study that a superintendent was an influential factor in a reduced student performance on standardized assessments. And so just really briefly, I'll go over a couple of terms that we use in our paper and in this presentation. The first is standards-based grading. And so instead of an ABCD model, we move towards a 1, 2, 3, 4 model, which is based on levels of progress towards proficiency. One-to-one technology refers to each student having their own access to a laptop or tablet computer. Early out Fridays preserved half of Fridays for PLC meetings. Groups of teachers plan and meet. And alternative seating refers to allowing a less rigidly arranged classroom. Sometimes you find couches or beanbags, sort of bouncy round chairs. And so just real quick on the lit, teachers tend to feel most effective when they're in systems that enable collaboration and reflection. Effective agentic teachers produce learning environments that enable agentic students, but these systems can tilt out of sync with a teacher's values. As such, teachers can feel a disconnect to their school districts when they face inaccurate evaluations, reduced salaries, possible termination based on student performance on state-mandated tests. District leadership is most effective when it supports the success of teachers. Effective superintendents are those that support the factors leading to, again, this agentic teacher practice. This support relies on something we might call a two-way street between district offices and classrooms with open lines of reciprocal communication. When district policies change, it is vital to engage teachers in the decision-making processes and also to capture our teacher expertise. When making change, it is also important to establish a clear and cohesive shared vision for the district. So the setting for this work was a school district of about 4,500 students in a rural part of the upper south of the United States. 70% of the students identify as white, and so it's a little bit diverse, fairly reflective of the region. It is a high poverty district, and so roughly 60% of students qualify for free and reduced lunch, which is the standard way that we establish poverty in a district. For this, it takes place between third and eighth grade, and so we're looking at the success of these students on standardized tests. We gathered this assessment data from 2008 to 2018, and then we'll add a coda to that. And the method that we used, again, we asked a couple of questions. How do administrative decisions impact test scores? We asked how do specific administration decisions impact student performance? And in order to pull this off, we collected both the standardized test data, we looked through district archives, and then we also sent 90 teachers a survey, of which 70 of them responded to this, and so we collected that, and we'll show that here in just a minute. I think the questions were Likert scaled, and so, but we didn't include a neutral on those, and so it was a 4-point scale. There was no sort of ability to pick a 3 and disagree with either idea. Survey data was run through t-tests. They ran in ANOVA. This is outside my expertise. This is some quantitative data collection and assessment that, and our quant guy isn't here today, so I won't be able to explain that process. But further, we collected qualitative responses, which are really interesting, but we have not sort of put that into the project. So this doesn't quite capture all of the qualitative information we collected. And so just quickly, these two graphs show district averages on both math and ELA standardized tests. And so the question for us became, what was the impact of a superintendent? And so over the superintendent's tenure, a specific superintendent between 2013, 2018, you can see this really substantial drop. And so it's pretty consistent test scores, and this is based on state averages. And so the district performed fairly well in regards to the rest of the state up until the new superintendent took over, and then you can see this plunge in these scores with the new superintendent. And so ultimately this drove our question, which was what was this superintendent doing that was leading to this precipitous decline in student test scores? And so just to put this into further context, by 2021, so several years after this superintendent had resigned, we can see these test scores rebound back to their historical averages, both in math and ELA, which is pretty striking to us. So in terms of the survey we collected, we put this into these pie graphs to help it make sense. But when we asked our teachers about sort of these different district policies that the superintendent had enacted, which one of those did they think contributed to student test score increases or decreases? And so when asked about one-to-one technology, again, sort of all students having access to a tablet, it was roughly 50-50, whether they agreed or disagreed that this led to better test scores. When it came to alternative seating, roughly 60% of teachers disagreed that it led to increases in test scores. When it came to another district policy that's early on Fridays, you can see a pretty substantial number of teachers overwhelmingly disagreed that this was a contributing factor in increases in student test scores. And then project-based learning was kind of an interesting one, but project-based learning, teachers did feel like it contributed to, by a slight margin, felt like it contributed to increases in test scores. So when we put the question to our teachers in this survey about what they thought or who is to blame for this decrease in test scores, which is really, really interesting, they said ultimately students, they blamed students, followed by themselves, followed by parents, and then by a much smaller margin, building administrators. And the smallest sort of blame to go around was reserved for the superintendent, which we thought was really interesting. And so when teachers themselves were asked who is to blame for that decline in test scores, they blamed themselves and their students, which we thought was pretty interesting. So in terms of discussion, what does it all mean ultimately? And this is a bit harder for us to tease out. So there's no argument that scores fell sharply in the district coinciding with the arrival of a new superintendent. As we showed, they rebounded just as strikingly with his departure. What is also not in doubt is that the superintendent initiated a lot of unpopular new requirements of teachers and failed to adequately communicate the rationale behind seemingly unconnected but disruptive change. And yet, when apportioning blame, teachers blamed themselves and their students and students' parents by wide margins, not the leadership. So concluding, so ultimately there wasn't anything inherently wrong with the individual initiatives proposed by the superintendent. All of these things have been shown in various literature to have success. Again, this refers back to the sort of one-to-one technology, the preferential seating, ideas about place-based lesson planning. But the problem really, I think, is that it was in the way that these initiatives were rolled out that led to a drop in teacher confidence, and this likely led to a precipitous drop in student outcomes as measured by standardized tests. The commanding way that these were churned out by district office led teachers to assume district leadership was just throwing things at the wall to see what might stick. Ultimately, nothing did. Staff morale dropped and student outcomes suffered. The lesson, echoed in the literature, is one of clarity of purpose, clear communication of the goals, and solicitation of teacher input throughout. So the keys to success for superintendents is even when initiating a lot of new proposals, it has to have a cohesive and clear vision, and this has to be communicated to teachers in order for them to accept it and to incorporate it into their classrooms. So I think something to be explored further is this question related to why we take on the failure of leadership. So why did teachers, when asked who to blame, when it was fairly clear to us based on the evidence that we collected, they continued to blame themselves. And so not just do we tend to blame teachers as a society when student outcomes suffer, they tend to blame themselves. And we would argue that that's not a correct way of thinking about this. So finally, we suggest there are experts in the building. Teachers as professionals are experts in their field. And if we want successful students, we need to empower agentic teachers. And so I'll open it to if anybody is curious to questions, comments, or complaints.